In early June, God told me it was time for me to get back into shape and lose some weight. I couldn't argue with that because I was at the heaviest I'd ever been. However, I was not too keen with his timing. There are definitely a few things I personally felt it was time for first before it was time for me to get back into shape and lose weight. One of those things being having my own place again. We're going to talk about this more on this channel, but in March of 2025, the process of trusting God as my provider led me to being evicted. Now, since the eviction, I've never been without a place to stay. And I know that's his provision. For the last year, it's my friends' yes to God, their obedience, their hospitality, and their generosity. They have provided me with a place to stay. And I'm so grateful for that. It just, I have to side note, being humbled and filled with so much gratitude for receiving from God, even though it looks nothing like what you want. Yeah, reaching that point did not come easy. But I'm so grateful that I am able to be grateful, even though it's not how I want it to be. But when he asked me to engage in getting back into shape and losing weight, I really thought like, hey, losing weight, it's a lot of work. And having a proper kitchen and me be able to meal prep in my own place makes sense. It made sense to me. This is me from a video that I recorded while I was doing my keto diet. So the last time that I lost weight, and I'm in my kitchen, and it was a great kitchen, and I had everything that I needed. Now, here, under the circumstances I'm in, I have some space in the fridge that I share with my friend or husband, a little bit of room in the freezer, and I have some shelves in the cupboards where I keep the other things that I need and my protein powder and my vitamins and my supplements and my air fryer, coffee maker. So I have everything that I need, but it's a major difference. So that was the first thing, which kind of links to the second thing, which if it's time for anything, then it's time for a breakthrough in my business, something that I've been waiting for decades, and which would lead to having the provision for my own place. And I've been faithful and I've been obedient the last few years, certainly this past year, doing everything that God has asked me to do. So a breakthrough in the business, yeah, I was definitely ready for that to start happening over the process of losing weight and getting back into shape. The other thing has to do with timing. He asked this in June. I live in Las Vegas. I did not desire to go through the intensity of my workouts and getting back into shape in the summer in Las Vegas. So even if you could have just postponed this by a few months so that it would be cooler and would make it easier, that would have been great. But here's the thing. The grace of God. And that's what I want this first video to really be about. If you've ever had to lose weight, let's say 10, 15 pounds or more, please leave a comment. I want to know who I'm talking to. Am I talking to people that understand how hard it is to lose weight? This is not my first time having to lose weight. Shoot, just 5 years ago, doing keto, I lost about 20 pounds. Before that, I've had to lose 10 and 15 pounds at different times in my life. And really, the big major weight loss was 50 pounds to step on stage for the first time and compete in women's physique. So I've had to lose weight before. I know how hard it is to lose weight. And doing so
in really not at all ideal circumstances. Now I'm turning 49 in a couple of weeks. I'm post menopause, and I've been through so much in the last few years. Again, I'm in a place of great gratitude, spiritually the strongest I've ever been, but that doesn't take away how much I've been through. So, although I knew it was time for me to lose weight, every time I tried, I just couldn't. I just didn't have any discipline and any willpower, any ability to do it. Losing weight, dieting, again, if you've done it, you've experienced food cravings, which can get really intense, and you have to battle those. Hunger pains. I don't know if food craving or hunger pains are the worst. Comment below which one you think is the worst. But oftentimes the two are combined together, and it's hard. I mean, it's mentally hard, it's physically hard, and you need a lot of motivation. So I I knew all of that, and I knew I just didn't have it in me just yet to do it. We're going to talk in the next video how I ended up putting on the weight. So you have the hunger pains, you have the food cravings, mood swings, being tired. There's so much, right, that comes when you really commit to losing weight. And of course, there are things you can do to ease those things, but I had never in the past gone through losing weight without facing some of those things along the way. So this is where I want to highlight just how incredible and amazing God's grace is. I am on day 71. I have lost 15 pounds so far. I have experienced no food cravings, no hunger pains, no mood swings, and I've had the motivation, I've had the energy, I've had the strength, I've had the willpower, and none of it is from me. The grace of God has been instrumental, but don't get me wrong, I'm still putting in the hard work. I'm at the gym 5 days a week, and they're intense and long workouts because that's what's necessary right now. I'm out walking at 5:30 in the morning, and it's already 90 degrees outside. For the first time in 20 years, I'm wearing a watch so I can track my steps and my heart rate while I exercise. I am meal prepping the best that I can. I can't afford the nicer apps that would help me track my workouts and my food. So I am old school tracking my workouts on my phone in the Notes app. I am tracking my food in a notebook, primarily my calories and my protein. I'm tracking my weight in my calendar. So I'm doing the work that it requires, and I'm getting the results. But there's just no denying that it's so much easier than I thought it was going to be.
Let's talk about God's grace. Most of us first learn about grace in connection with our salvation. Ephesians 2:8 says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith." We understand that we couldn't save ourselves. We couldn't be good enough, we couldn't be righteous enough, and we couldn't earn our way into a relationship with God. Salvation was something God did for us that we couldn't do for ourselves. But I think sometimes we understand that our relationship with God begins by grace, And then somewhere along the way, we start living as though everything else after salvation depends on us, as though God saved us by grace and then said, okay, now go figure out the rest. But that isn't the Christian life. The same God who saved us by grace continues to give us grace to live the life he has called us to live. Grace also reveals the goodness of God. The more I've come to know God, the more I've come to understand just how good He truly is. And His grace is one of the ways that His goodness becomes tangible in our lives. Grace is not only God forgiving us, and it's not only His undeserved favor towards us. Grace is also God actively working in us, strengthening us, teaching us, transforming us, and enabling us to do what we could not do in our own strength and abilities. That is the goodness of God. And I think understanding grace this way also helps us better understand God. Because sometimes we can hear about obedience, surrender, discipline, God's pruning, and God asking us something difficult, and picture a demanding God who simply expects more and more from us. But when we understand His grace, we begin to see things very differently. Because the God who calls us is also the God who comes alongside us. The God who asks us for our obedience is also the God who supplies what we need to obey. The God who transforms us does not leave us by ourselves to transform ourselves. So when God said it was time for me to get back into shape, He was not simply placing another demand on me during an already difficult season. He was inviting me into something that's good for me, and He's giving me the grace to walk it out. He knows the state of my soul and how exhausted I felt from the last few years, but He also knew that this is something that I desired. I wanted to be fit and healthy again. I wanted to lose the weight. I just didn't have the capacity, the strength, or the ability, or the motivation to get it done. So even though it was not my preferred timing, and I guess even more because there's nothing ideal about the timing, I can see His goodness in both the invitation and the grace He's given me to respond to it. And like I said, that grace has not removed the work from the process, but it has changed how I'm able to do the work and the posture from which I've been doing it. There's still effort on my part, still have to exercise discipline. I still have to make the right choices every day. But I'm not doing any of those things from a place of striving, resentment, or trying to force myself through something I've got nothing left to give to. I'm doing them with a heart full of gratitude, appreciation, and reverence toward God because I recognize that my ability to show up and to do the work is being supported by His grace. This is what Paul is talking to us about in 1 Corinthians 15:10. He shows us that grace and effort are not opposites. He says, "By the grace of God, I am what I am." And then he talks about how hard he worked. But he finishes by saying, "Yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me." Paul does not say God's grace meant I didn't have to work. He says the opposite. He worked hard, but underneath the work was grace. And that is exactly how I would describe what I'm experiencing right now. I'm doing the work, but the work is sitting on top of something that God is supplying. When God said, it's time, I obeyed. And I should add, I obeyed immediately. I brought all of those other things to Him, everything that I thought should happen first, everything that made the timing less than ideal, but I still obeyed right away. So I brought those things, but those things were not contingent on being answered before I obeyed. I obeyed. And once I did, suddenly I could do what I couldn't do before. And it wasn't because my circumstances changed. They didn't. I still didn't have the living situation I would have chosen. I still didn't have the business breakthrough I thought should come first. And it was still June in Las Vegas, and the heat was here to stay for quite some time. So nothing about the timing became more convenient. God didn't give me the circumstances I thought I needed in order to obey Him. He gave me the grace I actually needed to obey Him in the circumstances I already had. I think somebody needs to hear that because sometimes we're waiting for the conditions to become right before we believe that we can do what God is calling us to do. We think, I could do this if I had more money. I could do this if I had more time. I could absolutely do this if I had more support. I could do this if this other problem would get resolved first. I could do this if my life was different. And sometimes God does change the circumstances, but I'd say more often than not, He doesn't change the circumstances first. What He does is that He gives us the grace right in the middle of whatever circumstances you find yourself in. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That means grace is especially important when we come face to face with our self limitations. I think I'm being very clear about what God's grace can do, but let me just make sure that there's no confusion. Grace does not mean that everything God asks you to do will suddenly feel easy. Yes, sometimes the grace of God looks like supernatural ease. Sometimes it looks like the strength to do something that's incredibly difficult. Sometimes grace removes an obstacle, and sometimes grace gives you the ability to walk through the obstacle. So for me, part of the grace that I'm experiencing right now means that I don't have to deal with the very difficult aspects of weight loss, which is having the motivation and the energy to do it and having to deal with food cravings and hunger pains and mood swings. So I have experienced those previously in other weight loss journeys, and there was something that I knew I just didn't have what it took to deal with them. So the grace of God has made it so I'm not having to deal with them. And that has made a dramatic difference for me. But somebody else who's on a weight loss journey might still experience the food cravings. That doesn't mean you don't have the grace of God. The grace of God that you receive might be to be able to say no each and every time you have to face a food craving. So, how God's grace manifests in our lives, in other people's life, varies. I mean, even within our own lives, it's going to vary. So you can't expect, I've experienced God's grace this way. It's always going to be like that because that's not how it is. But the source of the grace is always God, and God always supplies what obedience requires. And grace does more than help us accomplish things. Grace changes us. Titus 2:11 through 12 says that the grace of God trains us. Think about that. Grace teaches us how to respond differently. Grace teaches us how to say no to things we used to say yes to. Grace teaches us how to live according to God's ways instead of simply following what our flesh wants. Grace is what God produces in us. So I want you to think about your own life right now. Where have you already experienced the grace of God without necessarily recognizing that you are experiencing His grace? Have you ever gone through something incredibly difficult and looked back afterward and thought, I have no idea how I made it through that? Have you ever been able to forgive someone when you knew that in yourself you did not have the ability to forgive them? Have you ever been able to love someone your flesh did not want to love? Have you ever kept going after your own strength felt completely gone? Have you ever experienced change in an area where you tried again and again to change by yourself and couldn't? Have you ever obeyed God in something you were convinced you could not do, and then discovered that once you stepped into obedience, the strength was there? What if you have experienced the grace of God far more than you ever realize? What if grace has been operating in your life all along, but you only associated grace with your salvation? Recognizing the grace of God in our past should change how we respond to Him in the present. That's how I was able to give God an immediate yes when He told me it was time to get back into shape. Not because I suddenly felt ready, but because I have history with God. I've already experienced His grace. I've experienced Him strengthening me when I didn't have the strength. I know all about Him carrying me through things I didn't believe I could endure. I've witnessed Him changing me in ways I could not change myself. And I'm familiar with Him providing what I need to obey Him. So when He says, it's time, I didn't need to know how I was going to do it before I said yes, because I know Him. And God builds on our history with Him. Every time we experience His faithfulness, His provision, His strength, and His grace, we learn more about who He is. And that history changes the way we respond when He asks for something new from us. So this transformation, it is reminding me that I can't evaluate what God is asking me to do simply by measuring my own ability. I don't have to determine whether I feel strong enough, motivated enough, disciplined enough, ready enough, or whether the circumstances are ideal before I obey, because my confidence is not in whether I have everything the assignment requires. My confidence is in the God who called me. Is your confidence in the God who called you? If God is asking you to do something right now that you've already decided you don't have the ability to do, maybe before you decide you can't, take a look back at your history with God. Remember where He has already carried you and strengthened you. Remember where He has changed you and where He has provided for what you didn't have. Then ask yourself, what would my answer be if I measured this next yes by God's grace instead of my own capacity? How does that change everything? Coming up next in this series, I'll share how the weight gain came as I was coping with food while God was healing me.